Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and The Last Guest Never Left, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Chair That Stayed Warm. Moments after the guests left, the seat still breathed heat. The velvet armchair still held the shape of a man who was no longer there. Poirot's gloved hand hovered just above the faded fabric, fingers twitching slightly in the drafty hush of the drawing room. He did not touch it, not yet. The fire crackled behind him, yet it was not the hearth that warmed the seat. The guest had departed 10 minutes ago, and yet the chair had not cooled. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured under his breath, straightening ever so slightly. There is something quite wrong here. The scent of cherry pipe tobacco still lingered in the air, curling up toward the chandelier where moths danced blindly. The house was quiet now, uncomfortably so, and yet the room was thick with something unsaid, something hanging just above reach, like the final damning note of a symphony left unresolved. Poirot's eyes narrowed, sweeping slowly across the room, not for grandeur, not for aesthetic, but for the absence of what should be there. He had come to Alderdown Hall at the request of Lady Isabel Marsh, a woman known in elite circles for her steely beauty and cold precision, but whispered about in darker corners for her peculiar ability to make people disappear from her life entirely. The invitation had been brief, scrawled in anxious script. Monsieur Poirot, something is amiss. Please, before it is too late. It had arrived with no explanation, but Poirot knew when fear inked itself onto paper, and when guilt was trying to wear fear's clothing. The evening's dinner had been tense, peppered with pleasantries that curdled as soon as they were spoken. The final guest to leave the table was Colonel Archibald Rice, a retired officer whose booming voice and excessive hand gestures had not masked the sweat gathering at his temples. He had excused himself early, mumbling something about a telegram at the post office, but Poirot had noticed. Ah, mais oui. He had noticed the colonel's fingers trembling as he reached for his glass, and now the colonel's chair, still warm. Strange, no? Poirot said aloud, glancing toward the hallway where the butler had vanished moments ago. A man leaves, but his presence clings like perfume. Lady Isabel entered the room behind him, her heels silent on the polished wood. She wore black, not the theatrical black of mourning, but the kind of matte shadow a spider wears before it weaves something fatal. Her eyes, a pale grey that refused to reflect the firelight, flicked to the chair. "You're staring at it, Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice smooth as varnish. Poirot turned gently. "Madame, it is not every day a chair seems reluctant to forget its occupant. You think something's happened to Colonel Rice?" "I think," he said carefully, "that you did not summon me merely to enjoy your chef's très admirable duck à l'orange." She smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. "You're right, of course. Something is wrong, terribly wrong. But I could not speak of it until the wrong person had left." "Ah," Poirot's mustache twitched. "And you believe Colonel Rice to be the wrong person?" "I believe him to be dangerous." There it was, the word that changed the shape of a room. Dangerous. It echoed slightly, bounced off the bookshelves and the champagne glasses, then fell silent. Lady Isabel gestured toward the liquor tray. A brandy? No, thank you. But perhaps you will indulge me in something stronger. Your truth, madame. She stared at him, her chin lifting slightly. Colonel Rice was my husband's closest friend. When Victor died last year, Archibald became attentive. And you welcomed his attentions? I did not. She folded her arms, voice sharpening. He insinuated himself into our finances, our affairs, even into my staff. And last month, I found my late husband's will, rewritten with Colonel Rice as executor and major beneficiary. Ah, Poirot's eyes gleamed. So the spider steps closer to the center of the web. She ignored the metaphor. I asked him about it. He claimed Victor changed the will before his death, but Victor hated him. He never would have done such a thing. And now, Poirot prompted. She hesitated, then whispered, now, I'm being followed. There it was, again, the unmistakable shape of fear. Poirot's eyes drifted to the hallway. A soft creak broke the silence. Not from the house settling, but from someone shifting their weight. I believe, he said gently, we are not alone. She paled. Poirot stepped softly toward the door, paused, then flung it open. The butler, Mr. Graves, stood just beyond it, holding a silver tray. But there was no drink on it. Looking for the brandy, sir, he said. Poirot's eyes dropped. Mr. Graves' shoes were wet, mud clinging to the soles. The cellars are not outside, Poirot said evenly. And yet, you've been through the garden. Graves didn't reply. Lady Isabel's hands trembled now. Poirot stepped closer. Tell me, Monsieur Graves, what errand takes a butler into the night during dessert? Graves swallowed. A call? From the post? The Colonel's telegram? Graves hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. Poirot turned slowly back to the fire. And yet, the Colonel never reached the village. My driver returned only moments ago. The road is empty. No sign of a man on foot. No post office open. No telegram received. Lady Isabel gasped. Graves flinched. Poirot turned again. So where, then, is Colonel Rice? A chair is warm, a man is gone, and a will has changed hands. And thus the crime had revealed itself, not with blood, but with absence. The kind of absence that screams louder than any shot. The night deepened. A storm clawed at the windows. Poirot requested the house be locked. No one in, no one out. The next morning, the groundskeeper found it. A trail of footprints leading away from the drawing-room window, but never arriving anywhere, just ending. Vanishing mid-step near the koi pond. Poirot studied the prints. He left, he said softly, but he never arrived. Inside the house, Lady Isabel began to unravel. Her story changed in small ways. First, she said the will was found in her husband's desk. Then, it was in a drawer she never opened. Poirot watched her lie, watched her eyes flicker at the name of the solicitor, and most importantly, he watched her fear when Graves stood beside her. It was Graves who blinked too often, who hovered near doors not his, who had once been a soldier under Colonel Rice's command. Ah, human nature, it never changes. In the end, the twist came, not with the will, but with the garden. Beneath the koi pond's lilies, Poirot's cane struck. Wood, a buried crate. Inside, boots, a uniform, and Colonel Rice's wallet. Dry, unsullied, as if never worn. The man had not fled. He had never been real. Poirot turned to Lady Isabel, who stood pale as moonlight. "You wrote the will," he said. "Graves planted it. And Colonel Rice?" Her lip quivered. "An invention. To frighten, to make noise, to explain why the money moved." "Non, madame," Poirot whispered. "He was not an invention. He was a ghost. Of your guilt, for you did love him once, but he betrayed you. And when he died in Cairo, you buried him not just in the desert, but in your memory, until the will reappeared." She broke then, softly, like china. Poirot turned to Graves. "You killed the real colonel." "Years ago." For her, Graves didn't deny it. "He made her cry," he said. Emotion flickered across Poirot's face. Something like regret. "The chair stayed warm," Poirot murmured, "because she never truly let him leave." And that night, as the constables arrived and Lady Isabel was led away, Poirot stood alone in the drawing room. The chair, now empty, was finally cold. "Love," he whispered, "is the only ghost that returns to finish the story." And he turned from the firelight into shadow. Just Chapter 2. The Toast That Killed at Midnight. The wine glass shimmered, but only one was poisoned. The wine glass trembled before it tipped. A pale, shaking hand had held it until it didn't. The rim kissed the mahogany floor with a chime as delicate as a death knell. And then silence fell over the dining room like a guillotine's shadow. The victim did not fall dramatically. There was no scream, no thud. Just a slow lean forward, like a man dozing after dessert, his chin settling gently into a pool of spilled burgundy. But the color was wrong. Too dark, too still. Poirot stood before the long candlelit table, his eyes not on the fallen body, but on the untouched glasses of the others. 12 guests, 13 glasses, 1 poisoned. Madame Bellamy gasped first. "Is he—" She trailed off, clutching the edge of her chair. Her breath caught against her pearl necklace, which twisted oddly as if strangling her own pulse. Poirot did not answer her. He merely stepped forward, careful, calculating. His shoes made no sound against the rug as he circled the table. But the symmetry was broken. Yes, the detail that sang out like a violin string, too sharp. 4 glasses were filled from the bottle. 3 sipped, 1 drained, but the fifth, still shimmered untouched beside the seat of Miss Daphne Vale, who had excused herself just before the final toast. A headache, she'd claimed. The timing, naturellement, had been impeccable. He turned to the remaining guests, all frozen in an elegant horror. Their clothes too stiff, their movements too calculated, like masks with eyes behind them, watching each other, calculating odds. Poirot's gaze swept the table. A painter studying not what was shown, but what was concealed. The man who lay face down was Jonathan Crispin, a barrister of repute, feared in the courts and loathed in drawing rooms. He had been invited by Lord Everwick, the evening's host, to celebrate the closing of a decades-old family estate dispute. Crispin had won it, of course, but the victory had made him no friends, only liabilities. Poirot bent beside the body. No foam at the mouth, no bleeding, no broken glass. A poison, yes, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. But not one of panic, one of elegance, one of precision. He sniffed the rim of the fallen glass, careful not to touch. Something almond-like, barely there, cloaked beneath the wine's bouquet. Cyanide, perhaps, or a cousin of it. But if the poison had been in the bottle, all would be dead. If in the glass, then the pourer was the killer. Who filled the glasses? Poirot asked without looking up. Lord Everwick blinked. The maid, I believe. Amelia. No, said Lady Everwick softly. She was sent out just before the final toast. You poured the wine, Henry. All eyes turned to Lord Everwick, whose face flushed not with guilt, but with confusion. I poured them all from the same bottle. Look, it's right there. Poirot studied the bottle. Uncorked, not resealed, no sediment, no clouding, and yet only one death. He rose, slowly. Mes amis, he said, the killer did not poison a bottle. They poisoned a single moment, a gesture, a private revenge masked in public celebration. The guests exchanged nervous glances. He examined each of them as if inspecting chess pieces. Daphne Vale, the actress turned socialite. With her, swift exits and fluttering lies. Henry Everwick, stiff-backed with too many secrets in his past and too much money in his present. Lady Celeste Vale, Daphne's elder sister, cool, unblinking, the type of woman who could sip poison herself and still not let the pearls around her neck tremble. Then there was Dr. Rupert Clive, the family physician, whose fingers shook too much for a surgeon and whose smile was a second too wide. Finally, there was Elias Morgan, the valet-turned-heir, whose presence at the table was never explained, only tolerated. As the clock in the hall struck midnight, Poirot moved to the hearth. There is something, he said, about a toast that reveals intent. A toast is ritual. It is performance, but it is also selection. Who speaks? Who watches? Who drinks? He turned, his voice soft but commanding. I will ask each of you to recount the final moment before the glass was raised. The stories began, small differences, a pause too long. Here, a contradiction there. Poirot did not interrupt. He merely listened, to the words, and to the silences. Daphne claimed she left before the glasses were filled. Lady Celeste corrected her. She left after the bottle was opened. Lord Everwick insisted he poured clockwise. Dr. Clive claimed he was the first to sip. But Lady Celeste noted the doctor barely touched his drink, said it gave him heartburn. Elias Morgan said he didn't notice anything. A lie. Poirot had seen him, watching the entire table during the toast, his eyes flicking from guest to guest, lingering especially on Crispin. Why did you stare at him, Monsieur Morgan? Poirot asked. I didn't, the young man said quickly. No, you did. As though you were waiting for something to happen, or praying it would not. Morgan looked away. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Tell me, how did Mr. Crispin treat you? Like dirt, Morgan snapped. He said I didn't belong here, that the Everwicks were making a mistake, including me, in the will. Ah, Poirot said. But you are in the will? Morgan stiffened. A motive, Poirot said quietly, but not proof. The night wore on. Poirot walked the house. In the study, he found a note written by Crispin, unfinished. It read, I know what she did. The wine will prove it. The she, Poirot noted, was not named. He returned to the dining room, examined every glass, every napkin, every trace of lipstick. And then he saw it. The twist, the detail that danced. One glass bore two sets of prints, faint, hurried, as if past, as if one had reached for another's. Poirot turned to Lady Celeste. Why did you raise your glass with your left hand, madame? She flinched. I always do. Non. In photographs, in society pages, you are right-handed. And yet tonight, you swapped. Why? Her silence screamed. Poirot pressed on. Because the poisoned glass was meant for Daphne. Was it not? Lady Celeste's lips parted. Her face crumbled. Poirot's voice was low. She was to inherit. She was to marry Everwick. You were to be cast aside. The elder sister, eclipsed by the younger star. You planned to poison her wine. But when she stood to leave, you panicked. You passed the glass to the man beside her, to Crispin. Tears gathered in Celeste's eyes. He wasn't supposed to drink it. He lifted the wrong one. Poirot nodded solemnly. And so you killed a man who never even liked wine. The silence that followed was thick. No one moved. No one breathed. Poirot stepped closer. But this, madame, is the tragedy. He knew, he suspected. That is why he wrote the note. He saw your eyes flick. He saw your hand change. Lady Celeste sank into her chair, broken. Poirot turned to the others. And so, mes amis, you see, murder does not always require hatred. Sometimes it requires love poisoned by time. As the constables led her away, Daphne Vale stared at her sister, betrayed and bewildered. You would have killed me, Celeste whispered. You killed me first. Every day they looked at you and not me. Poirot said nothing. Later that night, alone by the fire, Poirot looked down at the glass still on the floor. A toast, he said softly, is not always to the living. Sometimes it's a farewell to the life we wish we had. He straightened his cuffs, and the flame behind him flickered in the polished glass. And then the room fell dark. Chapter 3. Footsteps that didn't belong. Everyone was seated, yet someone walked the hallway. The footsteps came at precisely 9:37 p.m. Measured, deliberate, pacing steadily across the upstairs corridor like someone who belonged there, and yet did not. Beneath the clinking of spoons against porcelain and the polite hum of conversation in the drawing room, they cut through the evening like a match striking dry wood. Poirot froze mid-sentence. His eyes flicked upward. And though he smiled, though his moustache twitched ever so faintly, something ancient and sharp glinted behind his gaze. I believe, he said softly, that we are not alone in this house. Lady Farrow stopped stirring her tea. Across the settee, young Thomas Everwick looked up from his book, and the colour drained from his face. In the hush that followed, a single echo rang out again from the hall above, a heel, dragging just slightly, as if its wearer favoured one leg. The room was still. Not a soul moved, and yet the sound could not be denied. There was no one upstairs, no guest quartered above, and the servants, every one of them, were presently within view, huddled near the butler's pantry, with eyes like frightened deer. Poirot rose, his shoes soundless on the rug. Every candle in the chandelier above seemed to flicker in unison, as if reacting to a sudden gust of dread. Madame, Poirot addressed Lady Farrow without turning, please ensure no one leaves the room. She nodded, her gloved fingers tightening around the edge of her teacup. Poirot ascended the stairs, alone. The walls of Alderdown Hall were old and paper-thin, but the silence now was leaden, unnatural. At the landing, he paused. The long corridor stretched ahead, bathed in half-light. A storm clawed at the windows. The shadows of the lace curtains danced like spectres on the wallpaper. And there, halfway down the hall, was the faintest print of a boot in the dust. A print too large for the footman, too fresh to be anything but new. He stepped closer. Another footprint followed it, and another. but they ended abruptly near the old grandfather clock at the corridor's end, the one that had not chimed in 30 years. Poirot placed his hand upon the wood, still warm. When he returned to the drawing room, all heads turned. "No one," he said, "is missing. And yet someone has walked where no one should have walked." There were 12 guests gathered that night at Alderdown. Each of them had a reason to be in that house. But now, with the revelation of the uninvited presence, the drawing room itself became a crime scene. Unbloodied, yes, but no less violated. Poirot's gaze moved from face to face. Lady Farrow, widow of the late industrialist who had built Alderdown Hall, sat closest to the fire, her eyes dry but unreadable. Her nephew, Thomas Everwick, a boy of 23 with the nervous habit of tapping his thumb against his collarbone, watched Poirot with guarded admiration. Then there was Dr. Lavelle, round-bellied, soft-voiced, and quick to offer sedatives to any woman within reach. Miss Genevieve Marchand, the governess, sat nearest the French doors, her posture perfect, her mouth a careful line. And finally, there was Aldous Pike, an antiques dealer whose invitation had supposedly been a clerical mistake. Poirot addressed them calmly. "Mes amis, you are all accounted for," and yet footsteps were heard. Footsteps from above. "I ask you, did anyone leave the room in the last 15 minutes? Silence. Then Genevieve spoke. "Thomas left briefly, just before the tea was served." Thomas straightened, startled. "I only went to fetch my book. I was gone for less than a minute." Poirot's head tilted. "And what book, monsieur?" Thomas lifted the volume from his lap. "Murder in the Rue Morgue." "Ah," Poirot said, with a faint smile. "How very apropos." But he did not laugh. He paced the perimeter of the room, taking in every detail. The half-burned candle, the watermark near Lady Farrow's saucer, the fraying thread on Dr. Lavelle's sleeve, details unimportant to others, but to Poirot, c'est la vérité en miniature. He stopped near Aldous Pike. "Tell me, monsieur, why are you here? Your name was not on the guest list." Pike, a tall man with a thinning moustache and a voice like a cracked violin, hesitated. "Lady Farrow invited me." She looked up, frowning. "I most certainly did." Not Poirot's eyes glittered. A mystery within a mystery. A man who arrives uninvited. Footsteps where none should tread, and dust disturbed near the old clock. Dr. Lavelle cleared his throat. "Surely it could be explained. The house is old. Sounds echo. It could have been wind, or settling beams." Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, the house is old, but the dust on the floor is not ancient. It is daily. It tells a new story." He left them with that thought and made his way to the servants' quarters. There he found Martha, the head maid, trembling in her apron. "I heard it too," she whispered, like boots scraping wood. "But there was no one there. I swear it." Poirot asked to see the servant rosters. One name stood out: Edgar Bell, a stable hand dismissed 6 months ago for thieving. A name not spoken since, until now. And then Poirot found something even more interesting. A recent telegram, unopened, addressed to Lady Farrow. He opened it with gloved fingers. "The man you buried is not the man who died. Stop. The truth walks your halls. Stop. Ah, voilà." He returned to the drawing room and found that Pike was gone. "Where is the antiques dealer?" Poirot asked. No one had seen him leave. No one had heard the door. Poirot moved swiftly through the corridors, candle in hand. He reached the landing where the footprints had been. They were gone now, wiped, But beneath the grandfather clock, the hidden panel sat ajar. Behind it, a narrow stair. He descended carefully, each step revealing the chill of something long hidden. At the bottom, a stone chamber, damp and foul-smelling, and in the corner, tied to a rusted pipe, unconscious but alive, was Aldous Pike. Poirot freed him. "Who?" Pike croaked. "That," Poirot said, "is what I intend to discover." He brought Pike back up. The guests were horrified. "How?" Lady Farrow whispered. "We were all here." Poirot's gaze turned to Genevieve. "You taught Latin, did you not?" he asked her. "Yes." "Why?" "You also taught fencing." A curious combination. She didn't answer. He stepped forward. "Your name is not Genevieve Marchand. Your real name is Helena Bell, sister of Edgar Bell, the man who was buried in a pauper's grave with a crushed skull after being dismissed from Alderdown. They said it was an accident. A horse kicked him. But you never believed that." Genevieve's face darkened. Poirot continued. "You infiltrated the house, learned the routines, and tonight you unlocked the hidden stair because your brother had told you of it before he died. But someone else was already in it. Someone who did not want the truth to be found." She turned to Lady Farrow. "Tell them." Lady Farrow rose, slowly. "Yes, I knew Edgar. He was my husband's son. Illegitimate. He came to extort me. Said he wanted his inheritance. I refused. We argued. He struck me." "You killed him," Poirot said softly. "I pushed him. He fell, broke his neck." "And Pike?" Poirot asked. She looked at him. "He found the will. He knew. He threatened to expose me." "And the footsteps?" Thomas whispered. Poirot paused. "They belonged to no one living. They were recorded on wax by an old phonograph mechanism hidden in the clock, played by a timer, designed to distract, to mislead. Lady Farrow knew someone would investigate. She created a ghost to cover a sin. Lady Farrow turned toward the fire, her shoulders trembling. Poirot's voice dropped. "You see, mes amis, in old houses, the past does not rest. It walks, sometimes with boots, sometimes with guilt." As the constables arrived, Genevieve turned to Poirot. "You could have let her lie." Poirot's eyes were sad. "Lies, mademoiselle, are not eternal, but truth, it leaves footprints." And outside, the storm finally broke. But inside, all was silent once more. Chapter 4. The cigarette in the rain, extinguished outside the locked drawing room by no one. It should have been soaked through. The ash collapsed into grey mush. The paper melted to pulp by the relentless midnight rain. And yet there it was, a cigarette stub, lying neat and warm against the slate tiles outside the drawing room window, still smoking, still fresh, still impossible. For the window had been locked from within the entire night, and not a soul had stepped foot outside since the storm began. Hercule Poirot, standing just beneath the dripping eaves, tilted his head with the slight frown of a man watching logic try to contort itself into madness. "C'est curieux," he murmured, watching the final wisp of smoke twist away into the wind. A ghost does not smoke, no. The rain had come suddenly, hours after the house had settled into its strange silence. Alderdown Hall seemed to breathe with secrets, its old stones groaning in the dark. The storm clawed at the windows like a thing half alive, and inside, beneath candlelight and murmured suspicion, the guests tried to pretend that everything was fine, that the death of Richard Trelling in the locked drawing room 2 nights prior was a terrible accident. that the footsteps overhead yesterday were echoes and nothing more, that this latest fragment of unease, a cigarette no one would claim, was meaningless. But Poirot, he knew. He always knew. It was not merely the cigarette, it was where it lay, directly beneath the tall, barred window, outside a room where no one had exited, where the latch had remained untouched, where the rain had washed every other corner of the terrace clean. And yet that single stub remained, dry beneath, barely wet above, freshly dropped, recently smoked. By whom? That was the question, and when. Back inside, Poirot removed his wet coat and passed it silently to Graves, the butler, who wore the same practiced look of service, even as his hands trembled at the sleeves. Poirot said nothing. Not yet. His eyes, sharp as razors behind the polite facade, swept the gathering. The guests were seated again around the fire, its warmth doing little to thaw the chill that had begun to settle between them. Lady Viola Trelling, widow to the late Richard, sat closest to the flames. Her gown was dark green, rich and funereal. Her eyes, however, were dry, calculating. She smoked in long, measured puffs, but Poirot had already noted the brand, Devon's, not the same as the stub he'd found outside, which bore the silver ring of a Balkan black, stronger, rougher, often used to cover the scent of something else. To her left sat her brother-in-law, Simon Trelling, a man with military shoulders and a priest's voice, soft-spoken, reserved, but with a constant twitch in his right cheek that betrayed a growing panic. Across from him, in a chair too deep for her small frame, sat Miss Clara Sedgwick, Richard's secretary and longtime confidant. She stared into the flames, as if they contained the answer to a riddle she had once solved and forgotten. And finally, there was Julian North, a travel writer with impeccable suits and an absent alibi. A guest of the house, supposedly, a friend of the family, allegedly. No one, it seemed, could quite remember why he'd been invited. Poirot took a chair without asking and crossed his legs with careful precision. Silence hovered. The fire hissed softly. Then he spoke. "Who among you smokes Balkan black?" No one answered. He repeated with a trace of iron in the silk of his voice, "There is a cigarette, still burning, outside the locked window of the drawing-room. Someone was there, quite recently." Lady Viola lifted her chin. "None of us have left the house. It's been locked all evening." "Precisely," Poirot said, "and yet the cigarette lies in defiance of that truth." Julian North smiled thinly. "You think we're hiding. Someone? A phantom smoker creeping about in the rain?" Poirot's eyes never left his. "Monsieur, the dead do not light matches, and the living do not vanish into storms without reason." Lady Viola's voice wavered. "You think someone was outside the room the night Richard died?" "I think someone never left," Poirot said. "And they are still here now, among us." Simon's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "This is absurd. Richard died alone. The doctor said it was a seizure. Indeed. And yet the brandy glass beside him was wiped clean. Not a fingerprint, not a trace. Tell me, is that how a man drinks his final toast?" Clara looked up sharply. "He was paranoid. He cleaned everything himself. He even wiped letters before burning them." "Ah," Poirot said, "but did he wipe his own cigarette? Because someone smoked near him? The ashtray held a Balkan stub the morning he was found. And yet, none of you smoked that brand." Again, silence. Poirot stood. "I wish to inspect your rooms. It will take only a moment. Perhaps there are no cigarettes. Perhaps I will find only innocent matches. But the guilty, they always leave a trace. He did not wait for permission. Graves led him first to Lady Viola's chamber. Neat, controlled, absent of anything careless. No cigarettes, only Devon. The second room, Simon's, was similarly clean. A military man, everything arranged with regimental precision. Too precise, too empty. Poirot searched the drawer by the bed. Behind a leather journal, beneath a false bottom, he found them. Balkan blacks, crushed into a pouch of pipe tobacco, hidden but not destroyed. He returned to the drawing room and dropped the pouch onto the table. Simon paled. "They aren't mine." "No," Poirot said. "They were your brother's, were they not? But you kept them. Not as memory." As leverage, Lady Viola stiffened. "What do you mean?" Poirot turned slowly. "Richard Trelling was dying. Quietly. He had kept it from you all. But I discovered the letter he wrote to Dr. Lavelle, begging for a stronger dose, warning that the seizures were worsening. And you, Simon, knew. You were to inherit nothing. Viola, everything. So you waited, but not fast enough, no?" Simon rose, shaking. "I didn't kill him. I only—" "Silence," Poirot snapped. "You tampered. You switched his medication. You hoped it would bring about the end more swiftly. But someone else beat you to it." Eyes turned. Poirot let the silence swell. Someone slipped something into the brandy. Not poison, but something that would mimic a seizure. Something to mask the murder. Julian North leaned forward. "You're saying 2 people wanted him dead?" "No," Poirot said. "I am saying 3. He crossed to the fire and pulled a sheet of scorched paper from his coat. This letter was half burned in the grate in Lady Viola's room. It is a confession of affairs, of debts. Richard intended to change his will, to cut Viola out, to name Clara. Clara gasped. Lady Viola stood. "You read my letters?" Poirot bowed slightly. "I read what you tried to forget." "And the cigarette?" Julian asked. Poirot turned to him slowly. "You, Monsieur North, are not who you say you are. You were never invited. You arrived the day after Richard received a blackmail letter. The handwriting matches yours." Julian paled. "You served with Richard during the war. You believed he left you to die in that trench. You survived, changed your name, became someone else. But revenge, it waited, patiently." Julian stood. "You can't prove. You met him that night, at the drawing-room window. You smoked together. You passed him something. You saw the room from outside." Poirot stepped closer. "But the window was locked." He smiled. "Except that it wasn't." All eyes turned. Poirot lifted the old latchkey from his pocket. Hidden in the curtain hem, a copy. Someone had access. He turned to Clara. "You." Clara's face collapsed. "Why?" Lady Viola whispered. Clara's voice was quiet. "He promised me everything, then changed his mind. Said I was the help. Said I didn't belong in his will. And so," Poirot said gently, "you gave him the brandy. And while he convulsed, you locked the window behind you and left his cigarette still burning in the rain." Tears rolled down her face. "I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to feel weak, powerless, like he made me feel." Poirot sighed. "Then you succeeded." As she was taken away, Lady Viola sat silent. Poirot looked once more at the smoking stub. "Even a cigarette," he said, "can carry the scent of betrayal." And the rain did not stop. Chapter 5. The letter signed by the dead. It arrived at dawn. The sender was buried last year. The letter was dry when it shouldn't have been. The storm had raged all night, battering the countryside with wind and sheets of rain, turning Alderdown's gravel paths into rivers of sludge and flooding the front porch with muddy leaves. And yet, at precisely 6:03 a.m., a letter was discovered resting upon the hallway table, untouched by water, free of smudge or smear, the wax seal perfectly unbroken. It was thick, heavy, its edges neatly trimmed, its handwriting unmistakable. It was signed, in blue ink, by Edward Halcroft. The only problem, Edward Halcroft had been dead for 13 months and buried in the family vault beneath St. Dunstan's Church, after throwing himself from the cliffs outside Alderdown Hall. When Graves placed it in Poirot's hands with trembling fingers, the great detective studied it for a full minute before opening it. No one else had touched it. The household staff were sworn it hadn't been there when they closed the shutters hours before, and there had been no visitors, no deliveries, no footprints on the gravel. Poirot turned the envelope over. His name, written in an elegant, familiar script, to Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Private. Urgent. The ink had not run. The seal bore the Halcroft crest, an Ouroboros coiled into the shape of a sun. Slowly, Poirot broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. One page, dated exactly 1 year ago. You are being lied to. The truth is buried with me, but not for long. Beware the woman with a black tear. She is not what she claims to be. E.H. The signature was exact. An unmistakable flourish Edward had always added to his initials, the final stroke crossing back over itself, like a blade returning to the sheath. Poirot remembered it well. He had met Edward only once, during a brief stay in London. The man had been brilliant, erratic, volatile, poet and an heir. But above all, a man haunted by something unspeakable. He had disappeared from society 6 months before his death, and the inquest had ruled it suicide. Poirot had never been called to investigate. Until now. He stood in the great hall, the wind moaning beyond the windows, the dawn struggling to break through the gloom. The letter was a riddle, but Poirot, he adored riddles, especially those written by the dead. The guests had gathered for breakfast in the solarium, their faces pale and voices subdued. The storm had kept many awake. Tensions ran high, still rippling from the death of Richard Trelling and the mysterious footsteps that had preceded it. But the letter, when revealed, was like a dropped vial of poison. It spread through the room unseen, but with deadly purpose. Lady Elspeth Halcroft, Edward's sister, clutched the teacup tighter than porcelain was meant to endure. Her face was powdered, her grief lacquered over by decorum. "This is a cruel joke," she whispered. "My brother is dead. We buried him. I saw him lowered into the ground myself." Poirot looked at her calmly. "And yet the letter, madame, is very much alive." Beside her sat Marcus Blackwell, the family solicitor, a man whose spectacles always seemed just on the verge of slipping from his nose and whose nervous cough punctuated his sentences like unwanted commas. "It must be forged," he said too quickly. "There are handwriting experts. We can prove it." "No," Poirot said. "We do not need experts. We need truth." Across from them, seated apart from the others, was Miss Thalia Marsh, a pale, waif-like woman in her late 20s who had once been Edward's fiancée. She wore black silk, modest and precise, but it was her brooch Poirot noticed. A single obsidian teardrop. Jet, polished, glinting softly against her chest. A black tear, the woman the letter warned of. Do you know why he died, mademoiselle? Poirot asked. Gently, Thalia's eyes met his, steady, unflinching. I only know that he broke. Something shattered inside him. He stopped writing, stopped speaking. I tried to reach him, but... She paused. He was afraid of something, or someone, but he never said who. Poirot nodded slightly, and yet, in his final words, he pointed to you. Her lips parted. No sound emerged. Marcus interjected. Surely this isn't serious. A letter left for a year. Delivered how? By whom? Ah, Poirot said, these are the right questions. Let us pursue them together. He spent the afternoon tracing timelines. Who had arrived at Alderdown in the last 48 hours? Who had access to the front hall? Who could have slipped a letter beneath the nose of Graves without detection? And more importantly, why now? Why had a letter, supposedly written a year ago, chosen this precise morning to arrive? The first clue came from the groundskeeper, an old man named Jarvis, who swore that he saw a figure at the churchyard the evening before, cloaked, moving among the graves. Poirot followed the trail to the crypt at St. Dunstan's. There, among the damp stone and candlelit shadows, he found the Halcroft vault undisturbed. But on Edward's casket, scratched faintly into the brass plaque, was a single, fresh mark, the symbol of the Ouroboros, recently etched, deliberately placed. Back at the hall, he examined Edward's belongings, kept in a small trunk in Elspeth's room. Most had been unopened since his death, but one envelope was missing, the final page of a manuscript Edward had been writing, a fictional story, supposedly, a story about a woman with a black tear and a man who vanishes. Thalia claimed she never saw the manuscript. Elspeth claimed she had burned it. But Poirot had seen the corner of a scorched page beneath the drawing-room grate the night before. A confrontation was necessary. That evening, as the house settled into its storm-lit silence once more, Poirot gathered the suspects, Elspeth, Marcus, Thalia, Graves, and one additional presence, a constable, hidden just beyond the door. Poirot began slowly. There are 3 questions. 1. Who placed the letter? 2. Why was it written? And 3. Why warn me now? He turned to Elspeth. You loved your brother, oui? With all my heart. Then why burn his final words? She hesitated. Because they were mad. They spoke of betrayal, of shadows, in the walls. He said Thalia wasn't who she claimed to be, that she had lied to him, played him. And did she? Everyone turned to Thalia. No, she said softly. He had begun to believe strange things, that I was a spy, that I had married another man in secret. He accused me of poisoning his ink, of placing microphones in the roses. It was nonsense. Poirot nodded. Except one part was true. You were married, briefly, to Marcus Blackwell. Marcus went pale. That was annulled, years ago. It has nothing to do with... But you never told Edward, Poirot said, and when he found out, it broke him. Thalia shook her head. No, that's not... Poirot held up a fragment of the burned manuscript. He wrote, She loved me, with borrowed lips. I could taste his name on them still. The room went still. Poirot turned to Marcus. You intercepted the letter Edward meant to send me last year. You feared scandal. You feared your connection to Thalia would be revealed, so you hid it. Until now. Marcus slumped back. I didn't kill him. No, Poirot said. You simply let him fall. The final piece came from Graves. The butler, loyal for decades, had one confession left. I delivered the letter, he said. Everyone turned. I found it. Yesterday, hidden in the spine of a book Edward had given me. The Art of War. He asked me the week before he died to keep it safe. I forgot about it until the storm. The shelf collapsed. The book fell open. Poirot exhaled. And so the dead speaks at last. But Poirot wasn't done. He turned to Elspeth. You knew he was unwell, and yet you refused treatment. You allowed his isolation. Why? She trembled. Because I knew what he'd discovered. Thalia. She was seeing someone. Not Marcus. Someone else. Someone dangerous. A name he'd written in the margins. A code. Vireo. Thalia gasped. You're lying. But Poirot stepped forward, holding the matchbook he'd found in her drawer. Hotel Vireo, Paris. Dated 2 months before Edward's death. You were working for someone else. You were sent to spy on Edward, his writings, his accounts, perhaps even his inheritance. She broke. I never meant to hurt him. They paid me, said it was just information, but he found out. He wrote that letter and said he was going to tell you everything. Poirot nodded. So you left, disappeared, and when he died, you stayed, gone, until now. The room was silent. Poirot looked at the letter one last time. Truth has no expiration date, even when buried. As Thalia was led away and Elspeth wept silently, Poirot stood alone by the fire. He murmured, Sometimes the dead write letters not to haunt us, but to finish the conversations we were too afraid to start. And in the wind that pressed against the glass, it almost felt as though Edward was listening. Chapter 6. A name whispered through the keyhole. No one dared speak it aloud, but the keyhole did. The whisper slithered out, like breath from a dying man. Soft, fragile, but unmistakable. It came just after midnight, when the fire had burned low and the last of the clocks had wound down into silence. Hercule Poirot, seated alone in the upstairs corridor of Alderdown Hall, with nothing but candlelight for company, heard it through the brass keyhole of the locked nursery door. A name, spoken in a hoarse rasp, barely more than air. But it was there, real and wrong. The door had not opened in 20 years, and the name had not been spoken in 10. Sebastian. The syllables hung in the air like smoke from a smothered match. Poirot didn't move, not at first. His gaze remained fixed on the cold door, his thoughts quiet but suddenly racing. There was no child in the house, no voice that matched the one he'd heard, and yet it had not been imagination. Poirot, for all his brilliance, did not hallucinate. He listened, he studied, he believed what others dismissed. That was his gift. And tonight, the house had chosen to speak. Through the keyhole, through the smallest space where secrets escape. The nursery door, he knew, had been sealed since the night the Halcroft boy drowned in the estate's pond. Sebastian Halcroft, age 7. An accident, they had said. A tragedy no one dared dissect. His room had remained locked, not out of grief, but out of fear. No one entered, no one cleaned. The dust lay thick as ash, and yet tonight, someone, something, had uttered the boy's name through that locked keyhole. Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs. No footsteps had approached, no creak of boards, just the name, as if it had bled from the wood itself. He bent slowly, his moustache twitching with calculation. He brought his eye level to the keyhole and peered through. Darkness, but something within it stared back. At breakfast, the household was subdued. The storm had passed, but the silence remained heavy. Lady Elspeth Halcroft stirred her tea without drinking it. Simon Trelling read the paper upside down, and Marcus Blackwell did not appear at all. Only Thalia Marsh spoke, and even she was careful now, her voice low, her words selected like chess moves. Poirot watched them with a gaze that revealed nothing. He said nothing of the whisper, not yet. But the name, Sebastian, rattled through his mind like a marble in a jar. It had been erased from the family's vocabulary, never mentioned, never mourned aloud. And that precisely was the puzzle, for the dead child had not vanished. He had been buried, but his memory had been silenced. And it was that silence, Poirot knew, that now threatened to scream. He began with the records, old blueprints, the architectural bones of Alderdown Hall. And in the archives, he found what no one wished to remember: a corridor, a second nursery door, long since bricked over behind a false bookshelf in the drawing room, a passage that, if unsealed, would lead to the very wall where he had heard the whisper. Poirot returned to the room that afternoon. The air was colder there, though no window opened. The dust was undisturbed, save for the faintest line along the baseboard, where something had been moved. Not recently, not obviously, but long enough ago for the memory to be deliberately buried. That night, he brought the guests together. Lady Elspeth, Marcus, now returned and visibly ill at ease, Simon, whose hand trembled with every sip of wine, Thalia, her black tear brooch now missing from her collar, and one new figure, Esther Wickham, the housekeeper who had served at Alderdown since Sebastian's birth. Poirot wasted no time. Who whispered his name? He asked simply. They froze. Lady Elspeth's hand reached for her locket instinctively. This is obscene. Non, madame, Poirot replied. What is obscene is silence. The child drowned. But his memory did not. I heard his name. Last night. Through a keyhole no one has touched in decades. Simon scoffed. You imagined it. Poirot's gaze pinned him like a scalpel. Did I imagine the second passage, bricked behind your father's study? Lady Elspeth paled. I have seen the blueprints, Poirot continued, and the trail of wax dripped from a candle too freshly used. There is movement behind the nursery wall. There is breath where there should be none. Esther Wickham finally spoke. You shouldn't have gone near that room, sir. It doesn't like being disturbed. Poirot's brow lifted. It, madame, or he? She lowered her gaze. Sebastian was 7, Poirot said gently. Too young to lie well, but old enough to see. Thalia's voice cracked. See what? Poirot turned slowly toward the window. The wind stirred the drapes. Ah, now we come to it. A family secret, a locked room, and a child who walked in on something he was not meant to see. Simon stood suddenly. This is enough. You have no proof. Non, Poirot said. I have something better. I have the truth, and it was whispered to me by guilt. The silence throbbed. Then Poirot spoke again. Sebastian died not by accident. He ran, fled, from something, someone. All eyes turned to Marcus. The solicitor shook his head violently. I never touched him. Poirot's voice was soft. You didn't have to. You merely watched. And you lied. He turned to Simon. It was you, was it not? Simon's face flushed. What are you suggesting? Poirot took a breath. The boy found you in the study, with your hands around the throat of your father, not in rage, but in murder. Sebastian fled. You chased, and when he reached the pond, you let him fall. Lady Elspeth gasped. Simon stepped back. That's madness. Poirot's gaze never wavered. Your father had rewritten the will, left the estate to Edward. You found the document. You snapped. But the boy saw it all. So you silenced him. Drowned him. Simon's voice broke. I didn't mean to. He slipped. And you let him die. The truth had come full circle. But Poirot wasn't finished. He turned to Esther. You knew. She nodded slowly. I saw the footprints. The wet coat. I found the second will. Burned it. Protected him. Why? Poirot asked. Her answer was a whisper. Because I raised him, and I lost both sons that day. As the constables entered, Simon collapsed into a chair. The house seemed to exhale. Poirot turned to the locked nursery door. One last time. No one dared speak the name, he murmured. But children, they never forget. And walls, they listen. And through the keyhole, nothing whispered again. Chapter 7. The Fire That Rekindled Itself. Poirot watched the embers glow, and then rage. The fire had died, or so they thought. Its embers were brittle, collapsing gently in their bed of ash, a final sigh of warmth in an otherwise chilled drawing room. No one had tended it since the supper hour, when Lady Halcroft had insisted they all retire early, citing the return of her headaches. By midnight, only Poirot remained awake, seated alone in his armchair, sipping a modest tisane and listening to the strange, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock that refused to strike 12. And that's when it happened. A soundless flicker, then a burst of light, red, orange, almost blue, that erupted from the grate like a breath inhaled by some unseen mouth. The fire rekindled. No match, no spark, just flame, as if willed into existence by the house itself. Poirot sat forward, one hand still curled around his cup. Ah, he whispered, a resurrection. But fire does not believe in miracles, only in accelerants. He rose and approached the hearth. The flames danced high now, lapping at the brickwork with renewed appetite. But it was not wood that burned. It was something else, something darker. The smell was wrong, less cedar, more chemical, sweet almost, like burning oil. And beneath the top log, half swallowed by flame, was a piece of cloth, silk, blackened at the edges but unmistakably patterned, a scarf, and stitched at one corner, a monogram, L.T. Lucian Trent had died 2 years ago, burned alive in a hunting cabin on the Halcroft estate. The inquest had ruled it an accident. Faulty chimney, blocked flue, tragic miscalculation of heat and kindling, a closed case, a buried man. And yet here, now, his scarf burned again, twice claimed by flame. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He reached in with fireplace tongs and pulled the smouldering fabric free, laying it across the stone ledge to cool. The monogram was clear. The design, a rare Moorish pattern Lucian had favored, had not yet entirely curled into cinder. And from within its folds, something heavier dropped. A small ring, signet style, gold, soot-smeared, its face carved with a boar's head crest. Poirot turned it over in his palm, then looked back at the fire. Pourquoi maintenant? He murmured. Why now? The next morning, the guests awoke to find the drawing-room closed, and Poirot waiting in the foyer, sharp-eyed and silent. When they asked what had happened, he said only, "Something long thought dead has chosen to speak." Lady Halcroft arrived first, wrapped in violet silk and suspicion. She glanced toward the drawing-room door and made no move to enter. Following her came Benedict Vaughan, a stocky, quiet man who had once been Lucian's business partner before the fire, though no one could quite recall what business that had been. Then Genevieve Hallard, Lucian's former lover, returned to Alderdown under the convenient guise of research for her new novel. And finally, Arthur Ridley, the estate's groundskeeper, whose limp and permanently soot-stained fingers told a story of a man who had seen too many flames up close. Poirot waited until the parlour was full before speaking. He placed the burned scarf and the signet ring upon the table. "This," he said, "was not here yesterday." Lady Halcroft recoiled. "Lucian's? We? A gift from you, no doubt. You once told me the embroidery was your doing." She said nothing. Poirot paced slowly around the table. 2 years ago, a cabin fire claimed the life of Lucian Trent. His body was burned beyond recognition. The coroner relied upon dental records, or so we are told, but there were no witnesses to the fire. No one saw the moment it began, only the end. Ash, smoke, and silence. Benedict Vaughan cleared his throat. The cabin was remote. It was winter. There was a storm. No one could have reached him in time. And yet, Poirot said softly, the fire that took him has burned again. In this very room. A scarf. A ring. A message. He turned toward Genevieve. "You returned to this house last week. Why?" She met his gaze. "Lucian and I were not on speaking terms when he died, but I never believed it was an accident. I came to write, to be near the truth, or perhaps to finish the story." Poirot's voice was like velvet, and just as cutting. Ridley shifted in his chair. "The cabin was my job. I checked the chimneys every month. That flue was clear." Lady Halcroft spoke up. "You're suggesting he was murdered?" "Non," Poirot said. "I am stating it. And that the killer, emboldened by time, has grown careless." He let the silence settle like a fog. "Why plant the evidence now?" Benedict muttered. "Why the scarf? The ring?" Poirot tapped the ring gently. "Because someone feared discovery. Because the fire, the second fire, was not spontaneous. It was staged, and not by Lucian, by someone else." The investigation began anew. Poirot retraced every guest's movements. The drawing room had been locked, yet the window latch had been tampered with. Small scratch marks at the hinge, where a thin blade had worked itself beneath the brass. Someone had entered during the night. Someone who possessed the ring. And the motive. He began with the most obvious. Genevieve, the jilted lover. Her journals were filled with bitter poetry and fragmented letters to Lucian, some mournful, some scathing. But none proved malice, just grief. Then Benedict. Poirot discovered bank drafts, large ones, paid into Vaughan's account in the months following Lucian's death. From an unnamed company. Shell accounts. Poirot's brow furrowed. Finally Ridley. His tools had gone missing last week. A pry bar, a long-handled scraper, both recovered beneath the floorboards near the cabin site, cleaned, recently used. Poirot called them together again. The sky darkened behind the windows. A new storm crept over the hills. "Shall I tell you what happened?" Poirot said softly. Lady Halcroft looked away. Lucian discovered something about Benedict. Embezzlement. Fraud. Perhaps worse. He threatened to expose him. And so, the fire. A cabin, a body, an opportunity. Benedict stood, voice shaking. "You have no proof." Poirot raised a hand. "None, but someone does." He turned to Ridley. "You helped him, did you not?" The groundskeeper paled. "I never meant to—" Poirot cut him off. "You helped prepare the scene. You placed the wrong body, one drawn from the nearby morgue. A vagrant, no family, no name. Lady Halcroft gasped. Poirot's eyes glinted. Yes, madame. The man buried beneath Lucian's name was not Lucian at all. That is why the dental records were inconclusive. That is why the fire had to burn so completely. But then, she whispered, where is he? Poirot turned slowly to Genevieve, and she smiled. It was not warm, it was not kind. She stood, slowly, deliberately. He came to me, she said, months later, broken, hiding. The fire was his idea, but Benedict made it real. When he realized Lucian had changed his mind, wanted to live again, to undo the lie, he tried to kill him for real. He would have succeeded too. But Lucian escaped. He came to me. Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper. Where is he now? Genevieve hesitated. Dead. Truly this time. Heart failure. In Paris, I burned the scarf. The ring. I wanted him to live again, at least in myth, to force the truth back into the house. Poirot nodded, slowly. A fire rekindled to reveal a colder crime. Benedict was arrested that night. Ridley too. And Genevieve? She vanished. Before the morning, without a note, without a trace, Poirot stood alone by the fireplace. The embers still glowed. Fire. He murmured, cannot keep secrets. It only delays their telling. And somewhere, far beyond the storm, Lucian Trent was finally at peace. Chapter 8. Her scarf was still on the banister. She left in anger. So why was her scarf still damp? The scarf hung there like a warning, draped over the polished mahogany banister, its silk edges still glistening with damp, though no rain had fallen in hours. It was a pale lilac, threaded with silver, the kind of delicate thing worn for elegance, not warmth, and yet it felt strangely fresh. Hercule Poirot stood at the bottom of the staircase, eyes narrowed, cane tucked neatly beneath. His arm, the household had said she'd left, stormed out in fury just after 11, slammed the front door, vowed never to return, and yet her scarf remained, damp, as though the air had wept through it only minutes ago. He stepped closer. Not a single footprint marred the tiled floor, no water trail, no signs of a return. But the scarf's corner clung to the wood as if fingers had brushed it just moments before. Poirot's gaze lifted toward the upper landing. Shadows drifted like smoke across the walls, long and slanted from the chandelier above. He turned and called down the hall with quiet precision. Graves, where is Miss Lillian Fern? The butler appeared from the study door, face pale. She left, sir. In a rush, she was shouting at Lady Marsh, said she was done with the lot of them. That was nearly 2 hours ago. And yet, Poirot said softly, her scarf is still wet. Graves frowned. She wore it out, sir. I saw her wrap it round her neck. Poirot nodded. Yes, but she did not take it with her, did she? No, sir. Not unless she returned to place it back. Which, if she had, Poirot said, someone would have seen. The butler hesitated. No one's come in, sir. Precisely, Poirot murmured. In the drawing room, the conversation was hushed, cautious. The guests, already shaken by the events of the past week, fires that rekindled, names whispered through locked doors, letters signed by the dead, now glanced up, sharply as Poirot entered. Lady Viola Marsh sat upright on the chaise, her hand curled around a brandy glass, though she hadn't sipped. Her son, Martin Marsh, leaned against the fireplace mantel, trying too hard to appear disinterested. Near the window stood Doctor Edmund Rayner, hands clasped behind his back, eyes watching the rain. Poirot held up the scarf. It would appear Miss Fern did not leave as loudly as we believed. Martin snorted. She certainly meant to, made a scene loud, enough to wake the dead. Accused mother of controlling father's will. Called me a fraud, took her coat and stormed out. Lady Viola's voice was calm, but clipped. She's been unstable for some time, monsieur. She fancied herself my late husband's true heir. Poirot's brow lifted. Because of her lineage, no? A distant cousin, she said. Nothing legal. Poirot turned to Doctor Rayner. And you, Doctor, what do you make of Miss Fern? Rayner was slow to answer. She was fragile, but passionate. I once offered her something for her nerves. She refused, said she preferred her pain sharp. Poirot walked to the hearth, holding the scarf over the flames. The silk shimmered. She left in anger, he said, and yet her absence feel wrong. Her voice should still echo through the halls, but instead, nothing. Lady Viola's hand trembled slightly on the brandy glass. Poirot's eyes swept the room. Let us presume Miss Fern did not leave the house. Let us presume something happened to her between the slamming of the door and the silence that followed. An accident, Martin said quickly. None. Accidents do not place scarves precisely folded on banisters, nor do they dampen silk without a trail. He stepped closer to Lady Viola. What did she accuse you of? She looked away. She said you destroyed the second will, Poirot continued. The one that would have named her the heir to your husband's collection of manuscripts. That will was never real, Lady Viola said coldly. But the manuscripts are, Poirot said, and so is motive. He paced. She threatened you. She accused Martin of theft, and shortly after, she vanished. No one spoke. Poirot turned to Doctor Rayner. You were the last to see her alive. She passed you in the corridor, yes? The doctor nodded slowly. She pushed past me on the stair. She looked furious. I assumed she'd gone straight out. Except she didn't, Poirot said. She stopped, somewhere between the second floor and the front door. Perhaps to speak to someone, perhaps to confront them. He paused. And someone ensured she never made it to the other side of that door. Lady Viola's breath caught. Poirot laid the scarf down. So we ask, where is the body? The words struck the room like thunder. Poirot continued, his voice steady. The attic is locked, the cellar untouched. But the conservatory, the one room left unsearched, was damp this morning. The floor washed. Lady Viola stood. That proves nothing. It leaked. Poirot turned to Martin. What do you keep in the conservatory's old storage trunk? Martin blinked. Nothing. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Shall we look? They moved through the house, in a procession of dread. The conservatory smelled of bleach, too strong, too recent. Poirot crossed the room and opened the chest. Inside, beneath moth-eaten quilts and lavender sachets, lay a body, curled, pale, damp with rainwater, lily and fern. Lady Viola gasped. Martin turned away. Poirot stepped back. She did leave, but only in spirit. The constables arrived quickly. Poirot remained behind. He stood with Doctor Rayner as Lady Viola and Martin were questioned. You knew, Poirot said softly. You saw her descend, heard the fight in the hall. But you said nothing. Rayner looked at him. She was already dead when I got to her. Viola panicked. Martin helped her hide the body. I kept an quiet. Pourquoi? She paid my debts, Rayner said. saved my license. I owed her everything. Poirot nodded. And now you owe her justice. Rayner lowered his head. Poirot turned back to the banister. The scarf still shimmered with faint dampness. She left in fury, he murmured. But it wasn't anger that killed her. It was fear, the kind that clings to silk. He walked away, and the storm returned. Chapter 9. The photograph, with one face scratched out. They swore he was never at the party, but the photo blinked otherwise. The face was erased, but not forgotten. Poirot held the photograph beneath the low flicker of a brass lamp, the black and white print glossy from years of being untouched. 11 figures stood posed in a semicircle in front of Alderdown's ballroom fireplace, champagne glasses raised, smiles etched, evening gowns and tuxedos pressed to perfection. But in the far right corner, where one man should have been, only a ghost of a presence remained. The body was intact, the shoes polished, the cufflinks glinted, but the face, the face, was scratched away with violent purpose. Deep diagonal lines carved by a razor blade, tearing through eye, cheek, jaw, not once, but over and over. And beneath that mutilation, in fine copperplate, the caption read, New Year's Eve, 1936. And yet every guest in the house had told him, again and again, that the man in question, Francis Ellery, had not attended that party, that he had been ill, that he had been abroad, that he had never set foot in Alderdown again after the falling out with Lord Marsh the year prior, that his name, spoken even now, seemed to darken the air it passed through. But Poirot, as always, preferred the certainty of ink over the uncertainty of memory. And the photograph did not lie. Not unless someone had begged it to. He placed the photo down on the velvet table, runner, his gloved hands resting gently at either side. Around him, the ballroom stood cold and empty. It was the only room that had not yet hosted a death or a secret. But now, with this image unearthed from a box in the attic, this lie made visual, it too had joined the house's parade of haunted corners. Behind Poirot, the doors opened. Lady Elspeth Halcroft entered, the long train of her gown whispering across the parquet floor. "You found it," she said. Poirot did not turn. "Madame, the question is not what I found. The question is, why did you hide it?" She stepped closer. Her voice was calm, but her eyes flicked downward too quickly. "It meant nothing. Just an old photo, from a party no one remembers." "Non," Poirot said gently. "It is a record, a moment caught. And this vandalism of the face, it speaks loudly. It says, he was here, and we cannot allow him to be seen." She crossed her arms, the jewels on her wrists catching the light. "Francis was poison. You knew him. You saw what he did to Charles, to the estate. He came to destroy everything. He had no place here." Poirot turned, tilting his head. "Then why not simply forget him? Why not throw the photograph away?" She did not answer. Poirot studied her face. "It was not you who scratched it." "No," she admitted. "It was Charles. Your husband." "Yes." Poirot nodded slowly. "And yet he swore under oath that Francis was never at the house again. That he died abroad. That there was no quarrel." "There was a quarrel," she said, her voice sharpening. "They fought bitterly, but Charles forgave him in the end. He told me he had." Poirot's fingers tapped the table. "Forgiveness, madame, does not leave a man faceless." By noon, the guests had gathered again in the conservatory. The photograph now lay at the center of the room. All were present. Lady Elspeth, of course, Martin Marsh, her nephew. Clementine Drew, Frances's former fiancé, now married to Lord Marsh's solicitor. Arthur Rooke, the pianist who had played at that very party in 1936. And finally, Imogen Vale, Frances's half-sister, who had returned to Alderdown after decades abroad. Her arrival, Poirot noted, had coincided precisely with the fire that had revealed Lucien Trent's ring and scarf. Coincidence? Jamais. He addressed them slowly. Monsieur Ellery was here. The photograph proves this. So we must ask ourselves, what happened to him? Martin scoffed. The man was a drunk and a liar. He probably drank himself into a ditch in France. No, Imogen said suddenly. Her voice was a whisper. He never left Alderdown. All eyes turned. Poirot stepped toward her. You know this. She nodded. I saw him. That night, after the others had gone to bed, he was arguing with Charles. It turned physical. Francis was furious. He said Charles had stolen something, that the will, Lord Marsh's final will, had been replaced. Lady Elspeth's mouth opened. That's a lie. Non, Poirot said. That is motive. Arthur Rooke stood. If Francis accused Charles of fraud and then vanished, Poirot raised his hand. He vanished, yes, but he was not the type to disappear quietly, nor was he the kind of man others forget. He made enemies, but he also made demands. And that night, he made a threat. Poirot turned to Clementine. You were once engaged to Francis, and yet you married the very man who drafted the revised will. She paled. That was years later, after Francis left. Left? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Or was removed. A crack of thunder shattered the silence. The storm had returned. As always, Poirot produced a second photograph from his pocket, developed just this morning. And here, he said, is the proof. He laid it beside the first, a high-resolution scan, the scratched face restored by digital reversal, the man's features visible for the first time. Clementine gasped. It was not Francis Ellery. It was Charles Marsh. The man who supposedly scratched Francis's face out was the one posing where Francis should have been. Lady Elspeth whispered, That's not possible. Poirot's voice was quiet but unrelenting. Someone lied. Repeatedly. This is not a matter of a mistaken identity. It is a deliberate deception. He paused. The photograph was altered not to hide Francis, but to replace him. Clementine stepped back. I never... But you knew, Poirot said. You all did. They stared. Poirot continued. Francis discovered the true will. He threatened to reveal it. Charles acted first. There was a struggle. Francis was struck, perhaps fatally. His body was hidden, but not buried. No, that would be too dangerous, too discoverable. Instead, it was moved, piece by piece, burned, dismantled, scattered. Lady Elspeth's eyes filled. You don't know that, but I do. Poirot lifted his cane. Because the ashes in the drawing-room fire pit, collected after the blaze, contained a single human tooth. He let that settle. Martin turned, as if to flee, but the constables were already entering. Poirot said one final thing. The face scratched out was not meant to erase. It was meant to confuse. Charles altered the photograph after the murder, so that if it ever resurfaced, no one would know which man had truly been there. Imogen covered her mouth. Clementine sobbed quietly. Poirot picked up the photograph, now whole again. Memory can be edited, but the camera, she sees everything. And in the end, the party that never happened became the murder that never ended. Chapter 10. The Clock That Struck 13. Only Poirot noticed the missing hour was trying to return. The 13th chime rang out at precisely 1 a.m. Sharp, cold, and impossible. No one else in the house seemed to notice, or perhaps they were too deep in their own nightmares to hear it. But Hercule Poirot was awake. He had not slept. He had been watching the grandfather clock in the corridor, its ornate brass pendulum slicing the silence like a blade, each swing more ominous than the last. He'd counted 1, 2, 3, and then, past 12, a final chime, wrong, defiant, as though time itself was trying to confess. Poirot rose from the velvet chair and approached the clock. Its glass face reflected his own, in fractured symmetry. The hands were set correctly. Midnight had passed, yet the sound was unignorable. A phantom 13th chime, as if the hour itself was bleeding back into the world. He placed his fingers on the wood. It was warm, and not from the fire, from something else. "Ah," he murmured, "a lie repeated long enough always comes back for its hour." The house, Alderdown Hall, had grown more restless with each passing day. There had been murders, yes, but also something deeper, the sensation of a place unburying itself. Memories hidden in panels and behind portraits, now pressing forward through the walls. And tonight, with the chime that did not belong, Poirot knew the final secret was clawing its way to the surface. At breakfast, the guests were subdued, their once-practiced politeness frayed and transparent. Lady Elspeth Halcroft sat stiffly at the head of the table, her eyes slightly swollen, lips touched with too much rouge. Martin Marsh drank his coffee in silence, staring not at the others, but at the ticking of the clock. Clementine Drew whispered to her husband between sips, and Imogen Vale, always pale, now looked almost translucent. Poirot entered silently and laid a single piece of paper beside Lady Elspeth's plate. It was the schematic for the grandfather clock, drawn decades ago when Alderdown was first built. She looked at it with dread, not curiosity. 13 chimes, Poirot said softly. "Why?" She shook her head. "It's broken." "Non, madame. It is not broken. It is haunted. Not by spirits, but by truth. And you know what hour it tolls for." Martin stood abruptly. "What is this? Another séance? Another riddle from a Belgian?" Poirot's gaze didn't waver. "Monsieur, do sit. You are closer to this than you imagine." He turned to the others. "There is an hour missing from the records. From the night Lord Halcroft died, a gap. Between 12 and 1, all of you swore he died at midnight, that his heart stopped, that the doctor arrived at once. But the times do not align. The physician's report, the maid's statement, the telegrams sent that night, there is a discrepancy. Exactly 1 hour. Buried, erased." Clementine's hand trembled. "It was chaotic. We were grieving. Of course there were mistakes." Poirot leaned closer. "Mistakes, but the chime, it remembers. The clock was built with a secret, a hidden 13th strike, meant to test the mechanism, only activated manually, only heard by one who knows where to pull the lever." Imogen whispered, "Then someone made it chime last night." Poirot nodded. "Someone is trying to return the missing hour to history." He stepped away from the table and gestured toward the corridor. "We follow time's echo, yes? It leads us not forward, but back." They moved as a group, reluctant, through the long hallway until they stood before the clock. Poirot opened the base panel with a brass key, found earlier in Lady Elspeth's writing desk. Inside was a dusty lever, recently moved, a fingerprint left in the oil. Poirot turned. Who set the chime? No one answered. Then allow me, he said, to show you the hour you tried to bury. He pulled the lever. The clock chimed once, twice, 12 times, and then, with painful slowness, 13. Everyone flinched. Poirot stepped back. This hour was the true moment of death. Not midnight, not a heart attack, but something more deliberate. Lady Elspeth whispered, "You're wrong." Poirot's voice sharpened. "No. The doctor, your friend, your protector, lied. He falsified the time because he knew, because he helped." Clementine gasped. "You're accusing Edmund." "We, but not alone. He delayed the report. You, Elspeth, you delayed the call to the solicitor. And Martin, you disposed of the first will." Martin laughed hollowly. "What will?" Poirot removed a folded paper from his pocket. "The one you thought was destroyed. It was hidden in the base of this clock. A second will, naming Imogen as the primary heir." All eyes turned. Lady Elspeth stepped back. That will was forged. Poirot shook, his head. "No, it was witnessed by Francis Ellery, the man whose face you scratched from the photograph. He saw the truth, and he died for it." Imogen's voice cracked. "You killed father." Elspeth closed her eyes. He was going to give it all away. To her, a child of his shame, a bastard. Martin spoke low. "We did what we had to protect the family." The estate Poirot's voice dropped. "And now, the family is ashes. The estate a mausoleum. You killed the man who gave you everything. You erased an hour to escape judgment. But time, she does not forget." The constables arrived minutes later. Lady Elspeth did not resist. Martin tried to flee, but was stopped in the snow by a single bullet from a constable's warning shot. Poirot stood alone in the hallway after they were gone, his gloved hand resting once again on the side of the grandfather clock. "An hour lost," he whispered, "is always found, especially by those who listen." And as the 13th chime faded, Alderdown Hall fell silent at last. Chapter 11. The cellar that smelled of lavender. Underneath the scent, something rotted beneath the stone. The scent hit him first. Not decay, as one might expect in a house so soaked in secrets, but lavender, thick, cloying, and almost sweet. It drifted up the cellar stairs, like perfume from a coffin, curling past the candle Poirot held in his gloved hand, and for a moment he stood motionless on the lowest step, eyes narrowed, flame flickering. The smell was wrong, too strong, too recent, lavender to mask, but not erase. Beneath it, faint and sour, something older clawed through, the sickly undercurrent of rot, not food, not mildew, flesh. Poirot descended into the gloom, his footsteps muffled by decades of dust. The Alderdown cellar had been closed for years, boarded off after the flooding of 37 or so the household claimed, but now, with the door mysteriously unlatched and a small oil lamp burning at the far wall, the cellar breathed again. And what it breathed was not air, but guilt. He moved slowly past crates of sealed wine, rusted tools, and yellowing shelves of jam jars whose contents had long collapsed into ruin. But it was the far wall, the one below the servants' corridor, that drew him. Lavender bundles hung from iron hooks along the ceiling, the kind used to scent linen or mask the presence of rats. But this scent was strategic, too precise. It had a pattern. Poirot paused, the flagstone beneath his feet was uneven. He tapped it once with his cane. Hollow. He set down the candle and knelt. The mortar around one of the stones had been disturbed. Not recently, but not long ago either. He brushed it aside with delicate precision and pried the stone loose. Beneath it, buried shallowly beneath torn cloth and old newspaper, was what remained of a hand. It was skeletal, skin clinging like wet paper, but one detail struck Poirot cold. The signet ring, tarnished, dull, but bearing the crest of House Marsh, and Lord Percival Marsh had died 5 years ago. Officially of heart failure, officially in bed. Poirot whispered, "Alors, not heart failure, not in bed, and not alone." He replaced the stone and rose slowly. The cellar no longer felt like a room. It was a mouth, and something in it had been waiting to be found. By midday, Poirot had summoned the household into the morning room. The storm outside had stilled, but the air within was electric. Lady Elspeth was absent, still in custody, following the discovery of the 13th hour and the forged will. But her shadow lingered on every face. Imogen Vale, now growing ever more wary of the estate she was meant to inherit. Clementine Drew, tight-lipped and trembling. Arthur Rooke, pacing, and Dr. Edmund Rayner, who hadn't made eye contact with anyone since dawn. Poirot stood at the hearth. He did not sit. This was not a meeting. It was an exhumation. 5 years ago, he began, Lord Marshy was said to have died of natural causes. A tragic but unremarkable end. And yet, no doctor signed the death certificate. No undertaker reported the body collected. There was no grave, no monument, only assumption. Clementine spoke first. There was a body. We held a service. A service, yes, Poirot said, but no burial. The casket was sealed, and the chapel was empty. Arthur frowned. That's not possible. I saw the body. I remember. Non, monsieur, Poirot interrupted. You remember being told what to remember. You remember the scent of lavender, so much lavender, in the chapel, in the coffin, so strong it overpowered everything. He let that settle. Poirot turned to Dr. Rayner. You lied. Rayner's face twitched. I signed the certificate. After the fact, and the signature, it was not yours. It was forged by Lady Elspeth. Using your stationery, she had motive, yes, but she did not act alone. Imogen whispered. Then, who helped her? Poirot turned to Clementine. Your husband, madame. Mr. Drew. He oversaw the estate finances. He would have known what Lord Marsh had changed. That he planned to disinherit Elspeth. That he meant to name Imogen as heir. The will was to be signed on the day he died. Arthur stepped forward. But how was he killed? Poirot answered without hesitation. Poison, a slow-acting toxin mixed into his nightly cordial, administered by someone close. Someone trusted. Someone who slept in the room beside his. He turned to Rayner. You. Rayner flinched. No. Yes, Poirot said. You and Elspeth plotted it together, but you miscalculated. He did not die immediately. He wandered, fell, collapsed near the servants' corridor. That is why the body had to be hidden. Why he was buried under the stone. Why the cellar was sealed. Imogen's voice cracked. But why lavender? Poirot's voice was low. Because decay leaves traces, and lavender masks them. It clings to the air, to the cloth. It fools the nose, but not the mind. Clementine whispered. You said you found a hand. Poirot nodded. With a ring? Lord Marsh's ring. The same ring removed from the estate inventory 5 years ago. Claimed lost. The constables arrived within the hour. Dr. Rayner tried to run. He was caught before he reached the carriage house. As he was led away, Poirot stood once more in the cellar. The air had shifted. Less lavender now, more honesty. He whispered, "The dead cannot speak, but the earth remembers." And behind him, the candle sputtered and went out. Chapter 12. The last guest never left, because he had never truly arrived. The chair sat empty, yet the teacup was warm. Poirot placed a delicate finger against the porcelain rim. Heat still clung to it, like breath. Beside it, a napkin folded precisely, never used. And behind that, on the window ledge, a trail of water where no storm had touched. The fire crackled low, a single log settling with a hiss. The room had been sealed since midnight. Poirot himself had locked it. And yet someone had been here, drunk tea, left steam on the glass, moved the chair by an inch. An inch, a detail most would miss, but not Poirot, not tonight. He turned slowly, letting his eyes sweep the room once more. The carpet bore no footprints. The floorboards had not creaked. Yet everything had changed. The lamp wick was trimmed. A book, Meditations on Exile, had moved half a shelf down, and on the writing desk, the pen lay diagonally. He had placed it parallel. These were not coincidences. They were entries, signatures of a man who was supposed to be absent, but was never far. The guest book still sat open on the sideboard, ink dried to charcoal where names had been recorded day after day. The final page bore no signature, just a single line, curved and slanted. "I never left," and below that, R.E. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, "not a ghost, but a shadow. One that moves when no one watches." For weeks now, deaths had rippled through Alderdown Hall. Scandals uncovered, wills rewritten, skeletons unearthed from stone, from photographs, from time itself, and each tragedy had seemed to orbit one name: Richard Ellery, the man who never showed, the guest who never arrived. He had been expected at the first dinner, long ago. His room was prepared, his luggage never claimed. But all had dismissed his absence as miscommunication, a missed train, a forgotten invitation. But Poirot knew better, because Richard Ellery had been present at every death, not in form, but in influence. His name surfaced in letters, in burned wills, in the final words of victims, and now his teacup was warm. By noon, the surviving guests were summoned one final time to the drawing room. The air was heavy, not just with dread, but with the unmistakable finality of justice approaching. Imogen Vale, pale but steady, sat by the window. Clementine Drew clutched her locket as if it might burst. Arthur, Rook muttered to himself, fingers tapping a silent rhythm. Dr. Rayner was gone now, arrested for the murder of Lord Marsh. But one puzzle remained unsolved, the very first name on Poirot's list. He stood before them all, hands folded precisely before him. "I thank you," he began, "for your patience, for your truths, however late, for your lies, however rehearsed. But we have come to the end." No one spoke. Poirot placed the guest book on the table, open, the final page, visible. Richard Ellery was invited to this house, but he never arrived, or so you claimed, yet his room was turned down. His favorite brand of tea was stocked. Even the wine he preferred was chilled in advance. This is not done for a man you do not expect. This is done for a man who has already come. Imogen whispered, but no one saw him. Non, Poirot agreed, because he did not want to be seen. He arrived in disguise. Not as Richard Ellery, but as someone else. Clementine shook her head. That's not possible. Poirot turned. Is it not? Then perhaps you, madame, will explain the forged telegram sent to your husband the morning after Ellery's cancellation. The handwriting, yours. She flinched. Arthur frowned. Wait, you're saying she lied? Poirot raised a hand. It was a ruse. To hide his presence. But not to protect him. To control him. Because Clementine knew that Richard Ellery had come not for pleasure, but for vengeance. To reclaim what was his. He paused. Ellery was not just a guest. He was the rightful heir to Alderdown, the last illegitimate son of Lord Marsh. He had proof, documents, and he brought them with him. But someone made sure they were never seen. Arthur stood, pale. I never met the man. Poirot stepped toward him. No, because you met someone posing as him. He turned back to Clementine. Tell me, where is the real Ellery now? I don't know. Non, Poirot snapped. You do, because you helped bury him, not in earth, but in identity. You introduced a man to the house. You told the staff he was Ellery. You made him sign the book, drink the wine, sleep in the room. But that man was not Richard Ellery. He was an imposter, a decoy, used to buy time. Imogen stood. Then where's the real Richard? Poirot turned to the window. The garden beyond was motionless. He spoke softly. He is here, among you, hidden in plain sight, taking notes, leaving traces, adjusting clocks, whispering through keyholes, a man who faked his own disappearance not once, but twice. He faced the group again. And his real name is Arthur Rook. Arthur froze. Poirot continued, his voice calm. An alias constructed 5 years ago, after the supposed death of a pianist in Marseille. A fire, a body, no survivors, but Richard Ellery survived. Took a new name, changed his voice, returned to England, to Alderdown, to reclaim his inheritance. Arthur laughed, but it cracked. You can't prove that. Non? Poirot stepped forward. Your fingerprints, on the back of the teacup, matched to the French file. Your handwriting matches the signature in the guest book, and most damning, your blood, found on the corner of the scarf, left on the banister. A wound received when Lillian Fern struck you in panic. She recognized you. She tried to reveal the truth, and you silenced her. The room was dead still. Arthur's smile vanished. He whispered, she was going to destroy everything. My name. My claim. She destroyed nothing, Poirot said. But you destroyed everyone else. The constables entered, as if summoned by fate. Arthur made no move to resist. As he was led out, he turned to Poirot. You always knew. Poirot tilted his head. I suspected. But it was not until the tea grew warm in the locked room that I understood. You could not resist returning to your place. The door shut behind him. Poirot turned to the fire, gaze distant. A man who never arrives, he said softly, is the one who never leaves. Because he becomes the house, a presence, a rot beneath the wallpaper. And with that, Alderdown Hall went still, at last.